would be able to bring up in terms of biblically those implications. When we talk about balance and justice, obviously we know it's in God's character to be just, but what about mercy, and how does that play into this in terms of if we are the government or whoever is making the final call? Is there a place for mercy in these situations, or is it just we always have to be tit for tat kind of thing?
I think mercy can be seen in a lot of non-serious crimes.
Okay.
But I got another verse. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. Like, it's very just like God put these governments into place to kind of govern the people, and if that government, say, wants to execute you for doing something like terrible, I think that's the government's authority. Like they were put there for a reason.
And then also Romans 13, this is a part I didn't read it all the way, but it says, for government is God's servant to you for good, but if you do wrong, be afraid, because it does not carry the sword for no reason. Well, I think God, a government is used by God to show punishment for your sin.
And kind of like Sam, I think Sam mentioned it before, where that Bible verse was. Yeah, like you should have like mercy. It feels like a first time offense, but like one of those 7 things that God hates is like shedding innocent blood, and so I don't think that deserves mercy or anything. I think we should, give a preacher. Hopefully he comes to Christ or whatever. But here on the flesh, I think he has a price to pay for that. Hopefully, like I said, hopefully he gets saved and his spirit goes to heaven. But while here on earth, he has a price to pay.
Like the guy in the cross next to Jesus.
Yeah.
So do you think mercy could be shown also through the appeal process? When you say that if there's mercy to be given, it could be shown during the appeal process, is there still the opportunity for something to be overturned or for more evidence to be brought in? When you consider that maybe a form where there could be opportunity for mercy in that process?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the further you get away from, when the crime was committed and that initial trial, the longer you get away from that, the less likely it's going to be that that's going to get overturned. There's probably, especially in cases like 10 years ago, there's not going to be new outstanding evidence coming 10 years later. It's usually in that first few years that really determine whether a person is innocent or guilty.
Talk to me a little bit about somebody who's on death row, right? Somebody who's waiting to have a sentence, a capital punishment sentence carried out on them. What does life look like for them? Where are they usually housed? We talked about that's a lengthy process, right? I think Will said something like 16, 17 years usually on average. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like, where they usually housed, what's their living situations like as they're working their way through this extremely slow, maybe purposely so slow appeal process.
Well, like I said, they're in isolation rather than like general population with like the rest of the like criminals. And
Why is that, Harrison?
I don't know. I disagree with that, but that's just where they keep them.
Okay, so let me pause you there for a second, guys. Sam, Will, why are they in isolation? Why aren't they just putting it for the prisoners?
They still pose a threat to other inmates or even like officers.
I would submit that any criminal poses a threat to other criminals, right?
But it's against statistics. If you've killed someone before, then you're probably more likely to kill someone.
Not everybody who kills somebody's on death row.
Yeah. But I'm just saying you're more probable.
Okay, so they're in isolation. Is that maybe just another way for us to torture them a little bit, right? Get a little bit more justice?
Yeah.
I think in a little bit, it's kind of like protecting them.
Okay, how so, Sam?
Because if you put them in the general population, there's even a moral ranking system in prison, and
Very good.
someone that say was in there for, like assaulting someone and got like 3 years or something is gonna look at that guy that shot up a synagogue or something. They're gonna say, what the heck? And then that person's life is in danger before he has 16 years to prove himself innocent.
So if you're a rapist or a child molester or something, you may not be received very well in the general population.
Right.
I think that's exactly right, Sam. So they're in, usually in solitary confinement, or at least somehow separated from the general population for 15 or 16 years. Do we feel like that's a fun place for them to be? Is that may, they enjoy solitary confinement? I think it's like 23 hours a day in your cell,
Yeah.
right? Maybe an hour to shower and eat or whatever, and then you're back in your cell. We think that's the way we should handle. I mean, these guys are bad dudes, right?
Yeah.
They've done bad things, and we're kind of letting them go have a private room.
I think they should be in general population.
Okay.
The biggest reason is because it's cheaper, and
Little prison justice there too.
Whatever happens.
Harrison's like, "Hey, it works.
Yeah,
It's
Harrison's
fine.
not worried about
Yep.
it.
It'll all
Okay.
come out in the wash.
It's gonna all come out. There you go. All right.
that's what I think.
That may fall under cruel and unusual punishment, Harrison, you think?
No, I don't think so.
No. Just checking.
So does the death penalty deter criminals from committing these terrible crimes like treason and whatever else we've talked about? Do you think it's a good way of scaring everyone else to not do it?
I mean, obviously, there's still people committing the crime, so I don't think so. But when you look at, like, not many people who commit a crime think, man, I could be executed for this, because how many people get executed nationally? You know, like, it's not very efficient. It's not a very efficient process, so why would people be afraid of that? Like, not many people think, if I do this, I'm gonna be executed.
Sure, so if we have the death penalty then, for people who do things wrong, to maybe like provide that justice, and the people who are actually criminals who are committing these crimes aren't even afraid of it. Is there not like a lapse and there's not an issue here? You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that it means that like, it's almost like they're not worried about it because it probably won't happen. Like, well, we'll just appeal. But like they realize that it was more like of an actual punch where they could get quickly, then I feel like that would deter it more.
Harrison, do you think that criminals who are going to commit heinous acts, let's say they're going to shoot up a concert venue or attack somebody in a heinous way, do you think they're sitting down weighing out, gee, I wonder if I'll get 15 years for this, I'll get life for this, I wonder if they'll feed me well? Do you think they're working through
Well,
this?
those people maybe not, but like the gang members or people like that would probably maybe think twice. People that like aren't mentally ill maybe would think twice before, killing, or they feel like killing for revenge, for taking their drug spot, or whatever they do. I mean, they might think twice. Yeah, the crazy. I don't think the mentally ill people think twice about it.
Do you guys agree with Harrison on that? You're his friends, you don't have to agree with him, that's fine.
Well, I have a study right here by a criminologist, his name's Isaac
Okay.
Ehrlich, and he said, results showing for every inmate who was executed, around 7 lives were spared because others were deterred from committing murder.
This is an easy question. Through your research that you've done to prepare for today, I like to ask everybody this: is there something, a fact or a statistic or anything that you didn't know prior to studying this that you've learned, just something, or even something that's changed your perspective throughout this process?
Definitely the economic standpoint, because people can look at it morally and say, if someone does something like that, they should definitely be sentenced to death. But no one's going to remember, someone sentenced to death if they're not executed until like that long later, and it's, wasting taxpayers' dollars on someone who ultimately doesn't deserve to be a part of society.
Yeah, like that's what I was thinking too. Like I assumed that a death penalty was cheaper than keeping someone for their entire life, like feeding them 3 times a day and stuff. But it's not. But there's, like I said, there's easier ways that we could do to make it cheaper.
Then mine was like putting like a Christian worldview into it, because it's easy to say like, as a Christian, like you shouldn't kill anyone, and like everyone does deserve a second chance. But I came back to like balancing justice, and the 7 lives spared statistic really helped me like kind of accept like that's what they should get for their crime.
Doesn't it say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, though, Will? In the Bible?
Not in a positive way.
What's that?
Well, if it's an eye for an eye every time, then everyone's gonna get killed.
And want to be blind. Right? All right, guys, talk to me a little bit, if we're pro death penalty, talk to me a little bit, not so much the impact on the criminal who's been convicted and sentenced to death penalty, but couldn't we make an argument that the impact on the executioner would also be a reason not to have the death penalty? So I'll take you back just a little bit, not Mr. Kett. In World War II, the Germans initially were executing the Jews by firing squad, right? They only moved to gas chambers later because they realized that the people who were shooting the Jews, the mental anguish on them and the impact on them was devastating. So they removed the person from the equation and instituted the gas chamber. So if you're talking about executions here in the United States, you get lethal injection. You can still gas in certain places. Electrocution, certainly. Hanging and firing squad is still an option out in kind of the Wild West, right? To mete out justice in any of those situations, you have to have somebody who's pulling the trigger, giving the injection, pushing the button, releasing the gas, whatever. So let's talk a little bit about the impact on the executioners. Do we feel like that's something that they weren't sentenced to this, they weren't condemned to something, they didn't do something wrong, but yet they are charged through their law enforcement capacity, through their criminal justice capacity to have to kill somebody by their own hand?
I think you can make the same argument for soldiers who, go across seas and, kill people. And I think killing someone in general, if it's for a just cause, it maybe helps ease your conscience a little bit. I think so, like, I couldn't do it. I know, they probably couldn't do it. I don't know where they're at morally, but they probably couldn't do it. And I think it depends on the person. If someone has got to that point and they have that job as an executioner, I hope they'd be mentally stable and wouldn't have issues with it, but, it's a tough question.
The difference, I think, about your Nazi example is they were ordered to kill, most likely,
Okay.
from a higher position.
Okay.
So this is a volunteer job. Like, I don't think you're gonna be an executioner if you don't want to. I don't think that's how it works out. And if you do decide that, oh, that's not the right thing for me, then so I think someone being ordered to kill people and getting mentally unstable is there's a reason for that, because I don't think most people like killing people.
Exactly. Like the Nazis, they were murdering people. I think there's a difference between murdering and killing.
Okay.
Like killing could be like self-defense, that's a justified way. And so I think that the executioners here could try to look through it through that lens of, I'm not murdering somebody, I'm bringing justice, I'm killing the justified way almost.
Okay, so let's shift gears just a little bit from the executioner. We've talked about the person who's being executed. Let's talk about that piece in between, so the method of execution. I believe I've heard a lot about specifically lethal injection, which seems to be kind of the more common form of execution recently, right? We don't hear a lot about electrocutions. We certainly don't hear a lot about firing squads that we've talked about. That's an option. Lethal injection, I think, has been in the headlines a lot, probably in the last 5 or 10 years. A lot of consternation about that. Not necessarily that we're killing somebody, but the method by which we are killing somebody. What did you guys see in your research about lethal injection, the controversies surrounding that, and how you guys feel about it?
Oh, I can start off. So, for lethal injection, the process would be injecting something that puts the person to sleep, and then you institute the drug that would kill them.
Okay.
I saw one field case that was like supposed to kill you up to like 15 minutes, and while you're under from the first dose, but a guy survived for up to like 33 minutes, and he was like screaming in pain. But then I kind of struggle with it because whoever he killed, it probably didn't feel very good. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a painless, like, the victim didn't die painless. So it kind of like eases me to say, like, well, should we really have like so much compassion for this person who had a very flawed system, which is a very low % of that happening? So, I mean, I don't see.
So if we're talking about compassion, that's a, I have so many follow-up questions. So that's a very slippery slope with having compassion for someone who did kill someone, because you're right, once you mentioned, well, his victim probably didn't feel too awesome about being killed either. That's a good point. But how do we maintain a balance of having compassion? Does this person, just on a human level, deserve compassion for maybe doing, committing one crime, being sentenced to the death penalty, as opposed to, a person who is, has drug charges against them and is continually kind of perpetuating that violence in their own neighborhood, for example?
Yeah, I mean, like, that example of the guy who died didn't die automatically or whatever he was supposed to.
Mhm.
Like, they didn't try to do it to him.
Sure.
And so, like, it's not like that was like a planned thing. Not trying to speak for anybody, but Will probably, like, morally was like, yeah, that sucks, but oh wait, he did that.
Mhm.
So that's just like his own. Yeah. Okay.
I get what you're saying though with like repeat offenders for like more minor things. It's tricky because if you play it case by case, it's gonna be different for every
Sure. The whole thing's
situation.
tricky.
Yeah, but overall, I feel like, people don't really pose as big of a threat to society if they, like, sell drugs, stuff like that, as opposed to going out and, like, shooting up a church or something like that. I feel like this doesn't have anything to do with the death penalty, but drug offenses, things like that, the judicial system should have less compassion for them. Yeah. So.
Did you all support capital punishment before you started this project, or did your views change?
I supported it before.
Yeah, I supported before, but I didn't know economically it was a problem.
Yeah.
So that's what made me think about it. But
So how do Americans in general view the death penalty? Is everybody for it? Is everybody against it? Are we split? Split on everything? So
Yeah.
split.
Go split.
There's people that don't support it. Obviously, it's why like some states, like we said, 20 of them, right? 20 of the states don't have that, and 30 states do. So yeah, there definitely is. Not everyone agrees with it. I don't know the exact the polling on citizens, but yeah, they're split though, 20 and 30.
Do you find that goes down party lines more so, or
Like,
meaning political party lines? Do you
Oh,
find
yeah.
that there's
Yes.
one party that supports it over another,
Yeah.
that it tends to be?
the Republican Party tends to support it. The Democratic Party tends to be easier on criminals and stuff.
All right, I know we started down this path, I'll take us down a little bit further, but talking about lethal injection, so the thing that's been in the headlines recently is, to Will's point, is that some of the medications don't seem to be as effective or as immediate as was anticipated. So there's been some cases where somebody was given a lethal injection, and rather than the process taking a short amount of time, it's been drawn out over a long amount of time. And the person is, doing all sorts of different things that are very disconcerting before they actually die. And so the argument is made that becomes cruel and unusual punishment. If you're setting out to inject somebody with a lethal dose of something, right? Even though they're put to sleep first, as Will pointed out, but then you're giving them a medication. This is a state issued medication to somebody to do this thing, which is to kill them, and yet that does not go the way you plan, and it causes, rightly or wrongly, it causes that person to be, in pain, to be in anguish for whatever reason. That is cruel and unusual punishment. Therefore, the state should not be able to institute it because they're protected against cruel and unusual punishment. Therefore, that death penalty, at least that method, should be thrown out. Do you guys see that logic? Do you agree with that? And if not, why?
Like, going back to the Eighth Amendment, the whole thing about cruel and unusual punishment, if you torture someone, kill them, and then get on death row, you're not going to get tortured at all. You get put to sleep and then you're done for. I don't think lethal injection necessarily is a cruel way to kill someone.
It's humane?
We do it to dogs all the time. We euthanize dogs and, other animals. I don't think, if you're not feeling anything, how is it cruel?
Are we comparing animals to humans?
No.
That's, no.
Just
Jay.